Control. An attempt to engage digital environments to understand real movement. This is a video created in response to certain questions, or one question. If certain questions, too many to bother endeavoring to name. If one question, perhaps how can a video do things an essay cannot? Or how can a video of a computer screen do things that an essay cannot? If I want to understand something as a human being in 2018, I do not read a single essay. I might read an essay, but I'll also look at the internet. I'll look at Wikipedia. I'll talk to people close to me, far, whatever. I'm trying to figure things out between these dates. Why do people travel? Why have I traveled? What sorts of archives exist to chronicle movement? Are the images assembled on Google Street View archives? Does technology allow for simulated movement across terrain? Route View, discovered online, allows for simulated journeys. It is jarring, at first, encountering all the images assembled by Google Street View covering a day's journey by car, but perhaps a sort of ambient focus can develop. Begin. Tune into and out of the images as you like. I'll start with Wikipedia, exploring this figure, much as one would while riding along in a car on a long trip. What do we experience? What exists from the location, Eau Claire, Wisconsin, to the location, Potlatch, Idaho? What drove people from the Midwest to the West on this very route in years past? Westward expansion, economics, discovery of gold, perhaps, lumber. What drives someone from place to place now? Education, career, family. I am trying to find connections. I am trying to trace my journey back. What dead ends do we encounter in digital environments? In what ways do open-ended forms, like the video, like the audio recording, the field recording, enhance our understanding that more static forms like the essay do not? Where are we going? Going forward. And what of the archive, the historical museum? This from the Wisconsin Historical Society. After the Civil War, Wisconsin's lumber industry expanded rapidly, and Eau Claire earned the nickname Sawdust City for its large number of sawmills. More than 75 sawmills and factories were making everything from furniture to electric motors by 1890. Eau Claire, in other words, was a sort of company town, not unlike Potlatch. The turn of the 20th century saw the collapse of the lumber industry. Education and tires came to fuel the local economy. The predecessor of today's University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire opened in 1916, and the city is today home to two other colleges, Chippewa Valley Technical College and Emmanuel Lutheran College. In 1917, Raymond Gillette opened a rubber company that produced automobile tires. From 1917 to 1992, the tire plant, which was run by Uniroyal, that's my own addition, which was bought by U.S. Rubber in 1931 and renamed Uniroyal, was the city's largest employer and one of the world's leading producers of automobile tires. And an interjection there as well. You can now rent storage lockers in the old Uniroyal factory, which has been renamed Banbury Place, and there's supposed to still be rubber dust up in the corners and whatnot. And this quotation from the Potlatch Historical Society. After Smith left, Perkins, joined by Hezekiah Hollingsworth, used labor hired by Cox to construct a mill and mill race. The mill cut its first lumber in 1871. and the first log drive along the Palouse River took place that year. Although a crude, slow setup with a single perpendicular blade, the mill profited by filling the urgent demand for lumber from settlers on the relatively treeless Palouse. Cox died soon after the mill opened, and Perkins sold his share to Hollingsworth. In 1877, M.J. Sexton and William Codd bought the business and transformed the inefficient mill into a major Palouse business. In 1880, they floated 2 million feet of saw logs, primarily from Idaho, down the Palouse River to the mill in Colfax. The Potlatch Lumber Company, a Weyerhaeuser affiliate, bought the mill in 1904 and closed it in 1907, bringing an end to 36 years of sawmilling in Colfax. James Perkins stayed on in the town he co-founded. In the 1880s, he and his wife Jenny built an elegant Victorian home on the same property where the log cabin was located. The home was a center of Colfax society in the 1920s. Like the cabin, the Perkins house still stands. The Whitman County Historical Society maintains both. Frederick Weyerhaeuser, born in Niedersalhelm, Rheinhesse, came to America in 1852 as a penniless youth and went on to become known as the Timber King, a title he didn't like. He remained a simple man who shied away from publicity throughout his life. Who's Who in America only discovered him in 1911, 3 years before his death. He enjoyed his anonymity, as did his descendants. After coming to America, he worked as a day laborer in the vicinity of Erie, Pennsylvania, where he married Elizabeth Bledel. He then moved to Rock Island, Illinois, where he worked on a railroad. He advanced quickly wherever he worked. In one of the few interviews he ever gave, he answered a question about the reasons for his tremendous success by saying, "The secret lay simply in my will to work. I never watched the clock and never stopped before I had finished what I was working on." In Rock Island, he was put in charge of a sawmill and then a timber yard. After the Panic of 1857, he was able to buy both with money he had saved. Soon afterwards, he bought logs from the shores of the Mississippi and acquired additional sawmills. In the year 1864, Weyerhaeuser began to buy up pine tracts in Wisconsin, giving him control of all stages of the lumber business. He acquired still more land in Wisconsin, Minnesota, Idaho, Washington, and Oregon. In 1891, he moved to St. Paul, where he became friends and neighbors with James J. Hill, the operator of the Northern Pacific Railroad. Finally, this, the strange history that brings us to this moment, the amazing history of logging in the United States, from Wood Splitters Direct. Logging has been a part of American history and deeply rooted in the growth of the United States since the early 1600s. We all remember hearing about America's most beloved and heroic lumberjack, Paul Bunyan, and his Blue Ox Babe. Bunyan represents the hard work and labor of all involved in the logging industry and will continue to be in American folklore for many years to come. The lumber industry has been and will continue to be a staple for life, and in the past was essentially a vitality for surviving, such as building homes, staying warm, and making money through livelihoods such as woodworkers, builders, and more. Logging arose when settlers first started arriving in Jamestown in 1607, and since then has formed a booming economic structure. Logging became incredibly important when the need for shipbuilding became more frequent. In fact, in the 1790s, New England was exporting 36 million feet of pine boards and at least 300 ship masts per year. The logging industry was so busy and in demand that the New England area regularly shipped lumber and products elsewhere, and with the start of the Industrial Revolution, the demand for lumber in general spiked. During the 1830s, Bangor, Maine became the world's biggest lumber shipping port in the United States. With the outrageous demand for wood and wood products, Americans were constantly looking for new sources of timber in order to continue fueling the logging and timber industry. During the early 19th century, Americans started to head west in search of new logging land and, more importantly, a new life. With the help of FDR and the Homestead Act of 1862, families settled on 160-acre plots. The land was usually heavily wooded and great for logging and clearing out, which is essentially what the men of these families were looking for. In 1910, Idaho was distributing 745 million board feet nationally, and in the 20th century, the Northwest and Pacific Northwest became the logging center hub of the United States. The industry quickly moved and expanded throughout Washington and Oregon, and the timber harvest rate changed exponentially from 5% to 50% a year between 1945 and 1970. Throughout this time, the Northwest was an extremely significant place of work for logging and very important to those involved in the area of work. A statistic produced in 1970 proved that 41% of the nation's timber industry came from Washington and Oregon alone, which made it completely understandable why these locations were the prime locations for logging. To conclude, I'll read a poem by Tim Dlugos, The Far West, as I think its dream embodies the dreams of history, of logging, company towns, of young men and women staring off and hoping for something more. I like to think that the poem, this form, extends the reach much like the video, the digital environment, the archive, and says something we otherwise prove inept to say. The Far West by Tim Dlugos. The city and the continent trail off into cold black. Water the same way, at the western edge, a flat stretch with precipitous plains set perpendicular and back from the beach, or beach equivalent, a blacktop margin where the drugged and dying trudge queue up for Hades. Bolinas had its junkie lady with gray skin, gray sweater, stumbling through the sand with the short burst intensity and long run aimlessness of crackhead hustlers on the West Street piers. Dreams of Bolinas haunted me for years before I saw it. I'd huddle at the foot of a cliff in a cold wind late at night, wrapped in Indian blankets, waiting, with strangers as the tidal wave or temblor hit. Tonight I walk with old friends in a new dream past a vest pocket park of great formality and charm in the far west village. My disaffected former confidant has grown a ponytail and cruises up the street on a hog, a chopper, which seems a perfect locomotive choice. I walk out to the quay where gondola after enormous gondola departs for the other side, not New Jersey any more than something prosaic, as another mass of land past the bright horizon could function as a mirror of the chopped away Bolinas Hill. O western edge, where points of interest on maps of individual hearts and bodies disappear in waters of a depth unfathomable, even in a dream, I had thought that sleep was meant to blunt your sharpness, not to hone and polish with the lapping of the hungry waves of Lethe.